Well, Hans is a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation, and I have a whole bunch of constitutionally based questions for you, Hans. Welcome back to the show.
Well, thanks for having me back.
Of course. So you're the expert, and I'm going to use this time to get some constitutionality out of the way because a lot of people are looking forward in these next months leading up into the election. And I think that my biggest question is Joe Biden's ability to remain on the ballot, to remain the candidate, how they could replace him if he chooses to step down. But also the first one that I'm going to pose for you, the 25th Amendment. Each day we see things that make us question if he's capable of doing the job. Give us the lowdown, the basics on how the 25th Amendment works, and maybe if they were to pursue it, how it would apply to the situation of Joe Biden.
Sure. The 25th Amendment was ratified in 1967. And the way it works is if the vice president and a majority of his cabinet officers say that the president is unable to carry out the duties of his office and they send that notice to Congress, then the vice president becomes the acting president of the United States until the president has recovered enough to take over his duties again. If the president disagrees with that and says, well, I don't know, they're wrong, there's nothing wrong with me, Congress has to get together within 48 hours and debate the issue. And they have 21 days to decide who is right. And it takes a 2/3 vote of each house.
That's big.
To override the president saying, I'm okay.
So there's no way that happens without the Republicans cannot do this with the congressional makeup that we have right now. The Republicans couldn't do this to Joe Biden. It would have to be probably the most bipartisan thing that had been done in Washington, D.C. in some time.
Yeah, that's correct. And let me tell you, for that to happen, you would have to have a vice president and you'd have to have cabinet officials who put the good of the country, principles above politics. And let me tell you, having been in this town now for 4 years with this administration, the president could be comatose in the White House, and they would not do that. In fact, I think what they would do is exactly what happened historically in 1919. Harold Wilson suffered a stroke that totally incapacitated him mentally. What did his wife do? She hid him in the White House and basically issued orders from the White House saying, oh, this is what Harold Wilson wants everybody to do. And I think the same thing would happen here.
Oh, man, Dr. Jill in the driver's seat, sort of. Okay, we're speaking with Hans von Spakovsky right now. Some constitutionally based questions for you. I don't know what you feel comfortable commenting on, but based on your observation of President Biden, are we closer to having the 25th Amendment conversation than you've seen us be maybe in your lifetime or of any sort of recent history?
Yes. While they tried to talk about this when Trump was president, that was simply because they didn't like his policies. But look, we just had a report of all these members of Congress, including Democrats, saying that they had a series of meetings with him and that he was clearly mentally debilitated. I mean, we've never had that I can remember with any modern president.
So the only way that the American people are part of the decision, especially, beneficial, I guess, that it's in an election year because we do have a choice in November. Right. But outside of every 4 years having that election, you are beholden to the representatives you have in the House, the senators you have in the Senate, to back up or push back against what the cabinet decides to do.
Yep, no, that's exactly right. And like I said, there's just simply, I just can't imagine Joe Biden's cabinet, no matter how mentally incapable he becomes, actually taking this step because they would fear that it would somehow put them out of power.
So then shifting into, Joe Biden being the candidate on the ticket in November, they can privately and from a party standpoint pressure him to step down, to step to pull his name off the ticket. If he says no, I'm gonna run. I'm not pulling my name back for the campaign and the election in November. What options do the party have, maybe at the convention or leading up to the election, to say, okay, well, he can finish his term, but he's not the party's choice for the nomination for November?
Well, my understanding of the Democratic rules are that the delegates that were elected in each state are not actually bound by what happened in the primaries in their state. So and they have a huge number of what they call super delegates at the DNC convention. These are people who didn't have to get elected. It's state elected officials, party officials from all the states, and they have enormous power. If there was a movement of a majority of those people at the convention to deny Joe Biden the nomination, they could do that. But again, I just think the chances of that happening are just very slim.
Politico reported on May 28th, and there are other reports out there that coincide with this. The Democrat National Committee announced on Tuesday that it will nominate President Joe Biden through a, quote, virtual roll call, end quote, vote ahead of the August convention to ensure he appears on the Ohio ballot this November. So they did have some poor timing issues with Ohio and making sure that the convention lined up with making sure his name could be on the ballot. Let's say they nominate him virtually. Is that something that could then be undone at the actual convention that would take place after that virtual nomination?
Boy, I don't know. I don't know if they could do that. Now, I do know that if after the convention, if the nominee of the party resigns or dies and the position becomes vacant, I believe it's the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, which has, representatives from each state, that will then choose who the nominee should be. They don't reconvene a convention. The DNC, the ruling body of the party, would make that decision.
Okay, let me clarify that for a second. They nominate him virtually before the convention. The convention in Chicago, rah, rah, yay, Democrats. Look at how great our Democrat policies have helped the city of Chicago. How ironic. And then after that happens, Biden goes, oh, never mind, or he dies, and he's not in the picture anymore. Who decides who that nominee is going to be?
The Democratic National Committee. The DNC runs the party the same way the RNC, the Republican National Committee, runs the party. And what they normally have are two representatives from each state, a man and a woman, who are part of this committee that has the final word on what the party does.
Can you imagine what the man and woman from the Democrat Party process is going to look like? How do you do that? How do you figure? Anyway, that's besides the point. So, okay, lots could happen between now and November. I think we've established that. I want to shift gears to the Republican side of the ticket because I was looking, a lot of conversation out there right now regarding who is going to be picked by Donald Trump for his vice president. And Doug Burgum, he's a governor, Senator Marco Rubio, Senator J.D. Vance, Senator Tom Cotton, Senator Tim Scott, Congressman Byron Donalds, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, former Housing and Urban Development Secretary Ben Carson. These are the ones that are being highlighted right now. There's 8 of them. Multiple of these candidates, shockingly, not shocking, come from Florida. I hear people saying over and over and over again that the president and the vice president cannot constitutionally come from the same state and be on the same ticket. What is your response to that?
That is correct. The 12th Amendment to the Constitution very specifically says that the president and vice president shall not be inhabitants of the same state. So prior to the November election, if he wanted to pick a vice president who is from Florida, that vice presidential candidate would need to move and establish his legal residence in a different state.
And do you know what the time frame is? Like, is there a deadline when that person would have to make that move?
If you look at the amendment, it talks about the electors meeting in their respective states and voting by ballot. That happens in December.
After the election.
So, yeah. So by December, the electors, when they have their official vote as part of the Electoral College, the vice presidential candidate would have to be a resident of a different state than Florida, where Donald Trump has established his legal residency.
Is there a portion, is there also any caveat, and I've heard people discuss this as well, that suggests that, are the people who would not be able to vote the people from that state, that Florida couldn't vote for the president and the vice president because they were all from the same place? Or does that go for every slate of electors in all 50 states that wouldn't be able to vote for the same?
It's for everybody. That rule applies to all of the electors in all of the states, and they say that the president and vice president cannot be from the same state.
All right. So you could run through the entirety of the election. You could win the election, and then a Byron Donalds, a Marco Rubio, a Ron DeSantis, who's not on this list, Congressman, well, I said Donalds already. These individuals that currently reside in Florida could say, "Now I'm going to go to Georgia or something and cross the state line."
Yeah, but they better do it validly, or you and I both know that Democrats would sue and say he's improperly elected. They would have to really go and establish a new legal residence in a different state.
What determines when do you qualify for the new legal residence to exist?
See, that's a murky issue. That's an issue that comes up all the time when people are registering to vote or want to become candidates. And what the states generally say is they want to look, do you have a principal residence in the state? If you lived 11 months in Florida and you only live 1 month in Georgia, you're going to have a hard time saying that Georgia is your principal place of residence. They're going to look at things like tax returns. Where do you file your tax returns? Which state do you file it in? Because normally you do that in the state you reside.
Mm-hmm.
It's a whole series of things like that states look at to determine your residency.
My understanding is that Donald Trump has an estate in New Jersey, in Bedminster. Could he just relocate his home base to Bedminster to free up the Florida thing?
Well, yeah, if he took all the other steps to establish his legal residency there, but boy, I don't know why he
Florida
would want
taxes
to do that.
and Jersey taxes. Woo.
Yeah, well, not just that, but New Jersey politically is a hostile state to him.
Yeah.
Whereas Florida's a friendly state. It has a friendly Republican governor, a Republican-controlled legislature. I mean, the difference between the two is established by. Look, after the Trump verdict, DeSantis said, look, because he's now a convicted felon, he loses his right to vote based on New York law. Well, you know what? I'm the head of the Pardons and Parole Board in Florida, and we'll make sure that he's able to vote in the November election. That wouldn't happen in New Jersey.
Is it possible that residents could just be established? I mean, same kind of thing as Jersey, but maybe 10 times worse as D.C.
I'm sorry. Say that again. What?
Could the president or vice president, but more likely the vice president, could they reestablish their residence as Washington, D.C.?
Oh, sure. I mean, whoever the vice presidential candidate is, yeah, they can change legal residence. They just got to be sure it's ironclad, and that no one investigating it can say, "Oh, yeah, that's just fake. You haven't really changed your residence." That because that's the kind of claims that would be made against somebody who claims their residence because they're going to be the vice presidential candidate for Donald Trump.
So then the Democrats question the election. That's where we land.
Hans, wait.
Yeah.
Isn't that a criminal violation of the law?
I'm not. It depends. It really depends on who wins the election. I just got to sum it up in the only way that has nothing to do with the Constitution that my observations have led me to draw. All right. Well, Hans,
Right.
thank you. These are constitutional questions that a lot of people are talking about. Real quick, last question to sum up. Do you think that due to those reasons that the vice presidential pick will not be from Florida, or do you think that the investment might be made to make that official ironclad switch?
I think he's going to pick somebody who's not from Florida just to avoid the legal and litigation headache it potentially would be if he picked a Florida running mate.
All right. Well, we will watch and see. Maybe we'll get that news sometime here in the near future. Hans von Spakovsky, thank you. We always appreciate your insight, especially when it comes to the Constitution. Someone should have it. We appreciate that you do here.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Come back again next week. The senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation, a DOJ lawyer, former FEC commissioner, Hans von Spakovsky.